people are more and more hesitant to collect data in the first place. And our approach is a bit different. We say we need to collect data and we need to make data on mobility because that allows us to understand mobility better, but then make sure it is processed in a way that respects the privacy of the people, but also makes it available for others to use. Posmo is a mobility data cooperative from Switzerland, and we were founded back in 2020 with the idea of addressing two problems actually at the same time. On the one hand, filling a gap in the mobility data space where there is theoretically a lot of data available, but not so much for authorities or researchers that want to work with this data. So it's hard to create data-based mobility infrastructure, or also just doing data-based city or urban planning because the data is just not available. So that was one of the problems we wanted to solve. So creating a really valuable data set for the public authorities, but also for researchers to better understand mobility behavior and be able to plan cities or also rural environments towards more needs-based mobility, and also obviously more sustainable mobility. And the second problem we tried to address was creating a new governance structure for how we manage and administer this data, because the data we're working with is GPS tracking data, and that is obviously very sensible. The cooperative model is actually a quite known organizational model in Switzerland. We have a lot of housing cooperatives here. So that's basically individual people that contribute with a little bit of financial resources, and then they are able to pool their resources and build housing or invest in housing. And these cooperatives often have a sort of social aims. Why a cooperative is an attractive model, besides kind of this idea of co-ownership, is because it follows this idea that every member has one vote. Like, your vote doesn't depend on how much you own of the cooperative or how many shares you have, but you just have one vote. And so it's a more egalitarian model, I would say, than a normal business or a shareholder approach. And so we thought that model was interesting for how we deal with data, because it allows everyone to have one vote. So all the members can have their say. They also kind of are co-owners, so they will profit eventually, ideally financially, from revenue that the cooperative makes. The cooperative structure, we considered it an interesting model because basically it's a co-ownership model where everyone that is part of the cooperative has a say, has one vote, and co-owns the structure, and also allows us to put in place certain governance structure internally to protect the data producers, as we call them, and protect their rights to privacy and also their interests in general in how this data is used. If somebody wants to become a member at Posmo, they have to buy shares, so shares of the cooperative. And so we decided not for a simple membership, but having this kind of share model where it's almost like a membership, but people have to buy every year new shares of the cooperative. So that's basically the only thing: sign up and acquire these shares. You also have to collect at least 7 days worth of data on your mobility behavior. The value we think the data has is that it really allows us to understand how people move around cities, but also rural areas. And that helps us to understand mobility patterns and also kind of guide us towards a more sustainable mobility system. So that's kind of the more societal value we want to give. The type of data we have is not unique in the sense there's other sort of data providers, but it is very high resolution. And so it really allows us to understand the very nitty-gritty details of where do people walk, where do they take the bike, where do they enter a bus, take a train, take their car. And this helps the city administrations, for example, to plan bike lanes. So we have a project coming up with the city of Zurich in Switzerland. They are launching a campaign to get inhabitants of Zurich to donate their data that they can then use to improve cycling infrastructure, so the planning of where these lanes should go. So that's kind of one example of what Posmo and the data can help. Our governance is built up on one central element. We have an ethics council, an internal one. The members are elected by the members of the cooperative, are also all members of the cooperative. So it's an internal council, but people with a background in either data analytics or also digital ethics. The ethics council is responsible for setting the rules under which, and also the standards under which the data administered by Posmo can be used by third parties, but then also really determining the processes on which an interested party has to undergo to have access to our data, setting the technical standards towards anonymization, for example. And then we have an executive board that kind of runs the operations of the cooperative. So that's the two kind of governance structures. Both of them are elected by the members of the co-op. For about 8 months, we've been supported by a social innovation fund in Switzerland. It's called the Micro Pionier Fund. And we have this pilot phase running with them. So they are supporting us financially, but also with other types of resources in kind of building up the structure. And we hope to be able to enter a new funding round with this same fund over the next months. And we're currently launching these projects both with the city of Zurich that I mentioned previously, but also with a university in Switzerland that wants to do a research project on mobility behavior. So kind of running these first projects with our technology and the model behind. At the moment, we have the difficulty that our data set is rather small still. And if you want to have kind of statistically infer things from data, you need a rather large data set. So this is, I think, our biggest challenge at the moment, is growing our user base. Posmo as a project kind of initial group of people did on the side. So kind of everyone invested some of their free time in building this up because they believed in the model and in the value it could give also for this, the mobility space, and kind of transferring from this more volunteer-based thing to a more professional organization that has employees. That's a bit of a challenge, and we're still in that challenge, because if you start hiring employees, you need to make sure you have long-term funding so you can pay the salaries not only for a couple of months but for a longer period of time. And that, I think that's for us at the moment the biggest challenge in building this organization. The biggest challenge is overcoming this kind of thinking that everyone has to keep their own data and nobody wants to really share data. Also, data is often not interoperable, so kind of these whole technical standards, setting those up, I think that's the challenge. I think from a policy level, our biggest struggle is with the way we understand privacy. People are more and more hesitant to collect data in the first place, and our approach is a bit different. We say we need to collect data and we need to make data on mobility because that allows us to understand mobility better, but then make sure it is processed in a way that respects the privacy of the people, but also makes it available for others to use. They're also now looking into how this kind of issue of being able to use data while maintaining privacy of the people behind it, or the individuals, the data subjects behind it. And there is a new policy approach to this as well in Switzerland. It's called creating trustworthy data spaces. And I think we're aiming to fit our model right into this policy approach. The representativeness is really, really important for the data we are collecting, because if it's not representative, then you can not answer the questions you would want with the data. And that's something we're very aware of, and currently is still, our data set is extremely biased because the members are biased as well towards young people, for example. Our main strategy of tackling this is to run projects with external organizations that say we want to collect data with a determined group of people, and we are going to recruit these people ourselves. We just use your technology to do that. And so we hope that if we do this with different types of organizations, that the data collected in the end will be more or less representative. And then the other part is about how to build an inclusive or also diverse organization and community building. And I think that's the second challenge for now. The community we have to bring together people interested in these topics. And so I think for people that are external to this, I'm not sure what the added value we can really provide them is at the moment. I think it also depends a little bit in what areas we will move into. We have projects going on in the cycling space, so also working with cyclist organizations and advocacy groups here in Zurich, but also in other Swiss cities. There's already a lot of existing organizations there that are really targeted at advocacy for cycling. Collaborate with them and see how we can, with our data approach, create interesting projects with the existing organizations.